issued by Governor Sununu has expired, the planning board allows board members to participate electronically, provided a quorum of the board members is physically present in the meeting room. Please note that some of the members are physically absent. All votes taken shall be done by roll call. There is a contact number, or will be shortly, at the bottom of the DerryCAM screen with a phone number where members of the public who do not want to physically attend the meeting can listen in and participate in the public hearing portions of the meeting if we have such. This access number was also posted along with the agenda. So if you're on Zoom, the meeting ID is 754-663-912, and the phone number is 646-558-8656. And with that, we start our meeting by having the Pledge of Allegiance, so please stand and join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So for people in the audience, in case there's an emergency, we have an exit in the immediate back of the room. There's one to my right over here. Please do not take the elevator. Somebody will be there to assist and help you get down. So with that, we'd also like anybody that has electronic devices to please either mute or put them on vibrate. That would be appreciative. And at this time, I'd like to introduce the members. We'll start off with the planning director, Judge Cioris.
Good evening.
And we'll go back to the room there, the assistant director, Liz Robideau.
Good evening.
We get town administrator representative, Mr. Andy Chase.
Good evening.
We have full member, Mr. Grenice.
Good evening.
We have the vice chairman, Mr. McCackman.
Evening.
And we have the guy behind the curtain, Mr. Owen Proventia.
Good evening.
And Mr. Proventia, there may be somebody coming online, so if you let me know that when that does happen or occur. Is there anybody on there now?
We do have some folks
Are you able to
barely
tell?
identified.
If you're able to tell us the board member, Mr. Feinhauer?
I do not see that name, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Feinhauer, if you happen to be online, can you able to identify yourself so we can bring you into it? And the next member is an alternate who I'm going to make into a full position tonight, taking over Joe Temper's location, and Mr. Malaby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have the secretary, Mr. Nelson.
Good evening.
And I'm the chair, John O'Connor. Good evening, everybody. And with that, one of the members had a death in the family, so he was not able to attend today. We're going to start. Sorry to hear that. Yeah. And I send out condolences from the board.
Mr. Chair, we do have a hand raised online, someone identified by name as Andrew Myers. Perhaps we can see if that's...
Andy Myers.
Andy Myers, got it.
Andy Myers, our board members online.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm here. Hello.
okay, Andy.
There he is.
Very good.
So let's bring him on over with full
So again, to
capabilities.
the rest of the public, Andy Myers will be on virtual Zoom. Welcome, Andy, if you're hearing.
He's on his way in now, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We're going into escrow. The project name is Shade Tree Farm, the developer is Shade Tree Farm, escrow account the same, escrow type, cash escrow, parcel ID and location is 07084, 66 Drew Road. Please establish a cash escrow in the amount of $22,718.88 for the above noted project. This escrow account is non-interest bearing.
So moved.
Second.
So we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
We have someone remote, so I think we have to do
Aye.
roll calls, right?
Yeah, Mr. Myers.
Oh, that's right.
So, might as well call Andy first.
Okay, Andy, are you able to identify whether it's a yes or a no on the escrow?
Probably
Yes.
The rest of us.
Yes.
Okay, we got him,
You can
good.
probably just ask the rest of us now. You just got to make Andy part of it.
Okay, Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. McCackman? Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, escrow passes. Going to the approval of minutes of February 1st, 2023. Do we have a motion?
moved.
Second.
We have a motion with second. Any changes, any questions regarding it?
Same thing, just ask Andy first.
Andy?
Roll call.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Roll
Mr.
call.
Bernice?
Yes.
Mr. McCacken? Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. We also have the site walks of the note on February 11th.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve those also.
Second.
Can we have a motion? We have a second. Andy, Mr. Myers? I
Yes.
saw the yes. Okay, Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Bernice?
Yes.
Mr. McCacken?
Sure.
Mr. Malaby?
Yep.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. And you got the names of people who were there and who was absent, right?
It was cold.
Going to correspondence, Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing in our correspondence package this evening is a draft a proposal for amendment of the Town of Derry's zoning ordinance to add an Article 21, Workforce Housing, Section 165-163 through Section 165-170, and I believe that will be the subject of a workshop tonight.
No, this is not part of the workshop tonight, right?
Nope.
Not
Next
for this evening. You would
Next month?
you'd just let us know when you'd like to
Oh, okay.
schedule a
That's-
workshop for this.
Sorry, my mistake.
Okay. But just let the public know what we're talking about. There was a bill passed last year, and because we have an adult overlay that we will be addressing later on tonight, they've attached workforce housing on that. So anybody that has an adult overlay, you're going to be required to have workforce housing within that bill, within that zoning. And you have no choice, and as a matter of fact, they can even bypass planning on that. They can just go ahead and build. Hopefully, they're addressing that at the State House again. So, moving that, we're going to have the capital improvement plan fiscal year 2024 into 2029. And Mr. Seuras, would you welcome the town administrator and the CFO?
Okay, I'll make it real brief. As you know, the planning board's required every year as part of the town charter that the planning board shall, town administrator Dave Karen and Mark Fleischer, the chief financial officer, present the CIP to the planning board for comments and review. And then that will move forward to the town council during the budget process. So I'll turn it over to Dave Karen and Mark Fleischer.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
Be back with you. This kicks off our annual budget preparation with the CIP. As George said, it's required under our charter. We have to present, or at least deliver the CIP to the council at least 30 days prior to submitting the budget to the council. And the council receives the budget about April 1st. So we'll be delivering the CIP to the council at the meeting on next Tuesday night. As part of this process, we are required to consult with the planning board regarding the 6-year program, starting with FY24 through FY29. This may be old to most of you folks who've been here for a while. For those who haven't been through this process before, this is really a budgeting tool. Once a CIP is adopted, it doesn't have any legal effect, but it certainly allows us to guide and plan our capital improvements over the next 6 years. And so the process is the same as before. Mark Fleischer, who is our chief financial officer, really does a lot of the heavy lifting with the CIP. All the departments, boards, and commissions submit any kind of projects to Mark, who compiles them, reviews them, assigns revenues to those, and then Mark and I meet. We meet with staff for questions. We're currently at step 5, where it's presented to the planning board for review and consultation, and then we'll present it to the council next week, and the council needs to approve it per our town charter with or without modifications by June 1st. The funding structure is similar to previous years. There are really 3 main buckets of funding. Water and wastewater are ultimately funded by their customers. However, they do take advantage of any state revolving loan funds, which usually is accompanied by a 20 to 30% principal forgiveness. And also, they've been fortunate to receive some ARPA grants over the last couple of years. Cable projects are funded through franchise fees paid by the users, and also there's an annual grant in the amount of $25,000 from Comcast, which Owen uses to upgrade his equipment. And most of our general fund capital projects continue to be funded through the capital reserve funds, and those are largely replenished through our unallocated fund balance, or essentially the surplus at the end of a fiscal year. The current council policy is to have a target of a $1.5 million annual budget for the CIP. Based upon most recent funding availability for the last couple of years, this plan currently uses that target of $1.5 million. Of the $1.5 million, we have almost $300,000 appropriated in the budget every year to hopefully reduce our reliance upon undesignated fund balance, which can vary at times depending upon the condition of the budget and the financial performance of the budget from the previous year. So in FY23, we had about $267,000. Hopefully, we'll have about $300,000 in the FY24 budget, so we'll be looking for $1.2 million from unallocated fund balance. Now, as we discussed several years ago, due to economic conditions and policy decisions, the town really put the brakes on capital acquisitions, which really created some issues with us with respect to having some dependable equipment on the road. So as you recall, we've been aggressively replacing equipment over the last 6 years. I think we've now found a level plane. We've caught up. So therefore, we hope we can level the appropriations going forward and maintain our plan into the future. This chart separates the anticipated expenditures over or throughout the different departments. It looks very similar to last year's, with one major exception is the fire department. Looking at the impending increase in interest rates for bonds and the allowable cap under the town's tax cap per our charter, the council voted to proceed with a building project to replace Central Fire. It's about a $20 million project. It will be constructed on Rockingham Road on the backside of the Alexander Car Park, and we are currently in design with hopes to be bid late summer, early fall, and it's about a 12-month construction period, so it'll be completed in the fall of 2024. Looking at our debt, one area which we do not use capital reserve to fund acquisitions is debt service. And we only use debt service for major capital projects. And state law lets you know how much you can actually borrow. And state law says you can borrow 3% of the town's equalized valuation. As you all recall, we completed a reassessment back in 2022. The assessment was about $4.76 billion of taxable property. We think we're at 97%. They established the equalization ratio a year in arrears, so we'll know this year where we are. So we have an equalized value of about $4.9 billion. If you look at 3%, that means we can bond up to $147 million. We currently have $23.6 million in debt service, including this past year's issuance for Central Fire and the culvert projects. So the percent of debt capacity used is about 16% for the general fund. Here's a list of the debt service. You can see in the top section, those are general fund bonds, followed by the Dairy Commerce Corridor, TIF bond, water bonds, wastewater bonds. The general fund bonds, you can see there's a couple smaller issuance which are going to mature in the next 2 or 3 years. Then we'll have the transfer station, a Rockingham Road Bridge, about 10 years out, followed by Exit 4A, Hood Dam, and rec improvements, and then the Central Fire Station, a culvert replacement, which is a 25-year bond. On that one of the driving decisions for the council to proceed with that project is we knew that interest rates were going to be increasing significantly. So we issued the sale through the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank in May of last year. The net interest rate was 3.66%. The actual interest rate is between 4.1 and 5.1. What the financing community does now is they actually give you a bond premium. So the total issuance between the culverts and the fire station was $20.4 million. And you can see is we have to pay back only 17.9 on a higher interest rate. So therefore, our bond premium was about $2 million in that issuance. The Dairy Commerce Corridor TIF bond, that essentially is for the infrastructure improvements with the Walmart project a number of years ago. Mark successfully renegotiated that interest payment back in 2021. So now, at that point, we had 10 years left at 1.6% a year. Water system bonds, there are currently 2, and I'll get into another one which the council approved this past winter. But currently it's at 1.5 million, and the wastewater fund, you can see there are currently 3 bonds outstanding. We're going to have one retire this year, 1.3. So total principal outstanding is about $27.5 million for the town. Statutory debt limit on water uses the same mechanics as the general fund. However, you can bond up to 10% of your assessed value. So you can bond up to $491 million in water projects. Obviously, the town would not be positioned to pay back that limit. So the town's been very frugal with their issuances. The current debt, as discussed in the previous slides, about $1.54 million. And the council approved a project to extend water to Barkland, Ray, and Shepherd Hill and Morningside Drive. That is a $6.1 million project. Of that, the town received a $1.2 million ARPA grant, resulting in the debt to be issued of $4.89 million. Of that 4.89, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services will be forgiving 30% of the principal, which is about 1.4 million. So at the end of the day, the $6.1 million project, we're probably paying back about 55%. The rest will be through principal forgiveness and ARPA grants. So it was the correct time to proceed on that one. So including that debt to be issued of 4.89, the percentage of debt capacity used with the water system is just about 1.3%. Sewer, typically, they're included in general fund debt at all as well, unless it's a project which is on the NHDES priority list, part of the state revolving loan fund, approved by Governor Council, therefore is exempt from any kind of debt limitation. However, the current wastewater debt is about $1.34 million. And this is the debt which Mark successfully refinanced for the town, 1.6% for 10 years. There's about $1.9 million outstanding, which is about almost 3% of the assessment base for the Dairy Commerce Corridor. Just to remind you, the Dairy Commerce Corridor used to be the Route 28 North TIF District, and then it was extended down through the downtown all the way to Vets Hall to take advantage of essentially trying to connect one commerce district between Broadway and Crystal and Manchester Road. Moving on to major projects in FY24, we're only replacing one police vehicle, Division Commander SUV, which is a 2014 model. We'll also be replacing 60 tasers, which were originally purchased in FY19. They're 5 years old. The fire department will be seeking a Homeland Security grant to purchase an off-road gator, which will be used by PD and other town departments as needed. As you know, we've got a lot of recreation areas, a lot of golf courses, rail trail, and it's becoming more difficult to access those during emergencies, so this will help us with our response. Also, we'll be looking to replace our dispatch console furniture in the existing station. Will be transferred over to the new station. Your 2 pictures at the bottom of the screen represent the current layout over at Central Fire by the circle, and then up above is a layout of the new equipment. Top left, I suspect the room's not going to look that way, but that was a stock picture off the equipment manufacturer, which we plan to secure the equipment from. As discussed previously, Central Fire Station is currently under design. It's going to be, we believe, in the mid 30,000 square feet. They're currently working on that, and the size of the project is dependent both on needs and the budget. The council correctly recognized that the part of the project over which we had least control was the bond market. So about a year and a half ago, the council commissioned a study of all police and fire facilities. We had a pretty good handle on what the square foot cost would be, so we used that number to proceed forward towards a bond issue. Of course, since then, inflation's been up about 8% over a couple of years. So and we have to make some refinements, but so the architect has a finite project budget, the financing in place, so we expect that a structure similar to what you see here will be on Rockingham Road, operational probably in about 18 months. Major projects for Department of Public Works includes replacing a lot of vehicles, a loader and a skid steer over the transfer station, a number of medium and small pickups and one-tons. Also, we'll be proceeding on Sunset Avenue with replacement of those culverts this year as part of that $1.6 million bond. Also, you should know during the last biennium budget, the state actually sent a check to the town for one-time bridge aid of about $500,000. So that'll go to the bridge fund. That's where the council placed it. And we'll use that for any overages on these projects. And again, with any leftover funds, we'll move on to replace a culvert over in Cemetery Road. That's our next culvert on the list to be replaced. So there'll be 2 Sunset, and then Franklin is included in the bond, and then moving on to Cemetery Road. The traffic signal updates is a 4-year, $100,000 program. And this FY24 represents the last of those 4 years for upgrading our traffic signals throughout the community. Another significant project is Hood Park renovations. The design has been completed, and it should be bid out in the next month or so for summer, fall construction. If you look to the bottom of the picture, that light blue, the street hockey rink, that is currently there to give you a point of reference. So what you can't see below that, close to the parking lot, there'll be 2 pickleball courts which will be constructed. And off to the right, we'll have another splash pad. We currently have one up at Don Ball. This one will be significantly smaller than that. We'll also be reworking an ADA compliant playground. There'll be a sprinkler over in the pond to keep the water moving and other improvements. There's a second part of this project which we suspect will not cost very much. That's a passive recreation area. Hood Park, the active recreation area which you're looking at is about 1/3 of the land area, 2/3 is in passive. And Mark Broussard is leading a committee working with Pinkerton to design and lay out some trails and interpretive stations there. So and I suspect that project will lag somewhat behind this one. We're also looking at lighting in various fields and renovations to the Alexander Carr Lodge. Looking at the lodge, originally the council had planned to replace the entire structure. Once we issued a bond a few years ago, we took a second look. We brought in folks from UNH Sports and Recreation Management. They did a very objective study for us and came up working with the different community and sports groups in the community, came up with a pretty good plan of spreading out that investment across all of our facilities. So we anticipate spending about $150,000 on the lodge for some exterior repairs and interior renovations as well. And one of those projects with respect to fields, which will be acted upon by the council on Tuesday night, is renovation, really a reconfiguration of Vets and O'Hara fields. Driving in the field on the left, right now you can see the picture on the right, and it's pretty extensive outfield, which is used by one adult group, and that's going to be ending as we bring the fence in for what we really need that field for the youth of our community. And by doing that, we're going to repurpose the old outfield into additional parking. That's one of the concerns and challenges that the baseball folks have had up in that facility is lack of parking. So what we're looking at is parking in what used to be the furthest outfield, over on the back top right on the picture on your left, where suspect there will be batting cages and possibly pickleball courts over on the center right as well, in the left-hand picture. Excuse me. So this is a summary of the improvements which Owen is planning for DerryCAM. We've implemented a lot of improvements to this room, and now we're looking at infrastructure maintenance, some editing systems, increase investments in our media lab, remote production, and our FM radio station. Moving on to water and wastewater, the town council took time through workshops this past year to look at the water infrastructure, which in part led to the bond which they approved this past winter. And we'll be looking at the wastewater division either this coming year or the year after through an update of our long-term plan. But we are planning our typical about $600,000 in water main upgrades throughout the community. We have to drill a new well for the Willow Bend community well system, installing wastewater standby generators at our wastewater facility and all the pump stations. We also received a $3.2 million earmark EPA grant to extend sewer along 28 South from Berry Road to Ryan's Hill. Excuse me. So depending upon the bids when they're received later on this year, that will cover between 60 and 80% of the grant. The remainder will be issued with a bond, and then it's planned to be repaid by wheeling revenues. You may recall the town became involved with a project to convey water from Manchester to communities south of us through our water system, our infrastructure. So the town receives $1 per 100 cubic feet as a wheeling charge, and that goes into a fund. We work with Senator Birdsell, and we actually had legislation approved 2 years ago. We can use up to half of that for economic development purposes. And so we'll be using that fund to pay the debt service for the sewer extension. And last is to replace the sewer cleaner truck, which you see on the right. Now, the tax impact will remain somewhat constant around the $1.15 range, and that is looking at the debt service, the lease payments, which we appropriate funds of capital reserve, and then use capital reserve to pay off the leases. We use leases primarily for some building improvements, but primarily for vehicles. $0 to $50,000, usually pay that directly cash from our capital reserve funds. 50 to 100, it's a bond up to 5 years. I mean, a lease up to 5 years, I'm sorry. And then anything over 100,000, the lease will be anywhere from 7 years to 10 years. Like with our Quince, we're about $1.2 million that went out 10 years. We had some great leasing rates up until recently of, a 10-year rate for about 1.5%, and the rates are now, say, up around 4%. So it's just a consequence of the current bonding and leasing market out there. We also have non-lease acquisitions through capital reserve I just spoke of, and operating budget expenses. These are capital improvements paid from the town budget, and the most significant one is probably in FY24. You can see it, $1.550 million. That is the town's road maintenance program. And between that, and we also pay our lease payment when we replace our police cruisers, our Mark cruisers, every 3 or 4 years. So everything else is through either bonds or primarily lease payments. And that's what we have this evening. Glad to answer any questions if I can.
Okay, well, I'll start off. I have a few, hopefully softball ones. On the spreadsheets for the 6-year plan, you did mention briefly in some of the notes here about the CPI of what's going on with that. Is each one of the years have the CPI, or the numbers we're looking at there, is that just basically what you think the cost is going to be at that time without CPI?
It's really a combination. If we're able to estimate what the increases will be, we put that in there as well. And that's been our significant, I'm glad you pointed that out. That's been our significant challenge this year, is that, we kept bidding, especially vehicles, and nobody would bid, they didn't have any vehicles, so we tried to have a standard color in Public Works, but now you see a number of different colors running around with Town of Derry seals on them, because we're essentially buying vehicles off the lot. So where we can estimate what the impact, what the increase will be in the CPI, we put that in there. We do not expect the 6% CPI to continue forever.
I hope so. Yesterday's CPI was horrible.
Well, per our charter, we operated as of December 31st from the previous year, according to Northeast CPI, and for FY23 was 5.9, for FY24 it's 6.1. So.
Another question I have is on the, in the cable area, the revenues come from Comcast, obviously the cable. Does any proportion of that go over to the school systems? under their cable, or is that all under the town cable?
Well, there's three things. We have earmarked, the council has earmarked a cable grant to the school district to operate their system. It's about $51,000 out of the revenues. And so what we do is that Mark, Owen, and I get together every year and do like a 10-year projection of revenues, and we've actually planned on a 2.5% reduction every year in revenues because people are cutting the cable. Fortunately, that hasn't occurred as of yet.
Correct.
So we're going to look at that again and still continue to see our plan on a reduction. And the other revenue source we have is that $25,000 annual grant from Comcast. And so that pays for not only the operating expenses for Owen's department, it pays for the capital expenses, and it pays for the subsidy to the school to help them operate their public access.
Okay, also, as chair, I sit on the Net Zero Committee, and I know you have listed in here some EV vehicles. You don't designate that as whether they're 100% battery, or are you doing the hybrids?
For the police commander vehicle, we're going to look at an EV, 100% EV this year.
That's for the commander?
Yeah, it's good. You know, there's a lot of momentum to look at police cruisers. We run hot cruisers. You're better, if we had the state police model where every employee had their own cruiser to take home, it's easy to implement the EV because they're off. Well, the way we run our system is
You're turning it over to
when
the
an
next
officer gets
person.
off at 4 o'clock, another one jumps in the seat and off they go.
Right.
So we were looking at, for this year, is to get hybrids. There's a number of communities in the state who have used police vehicles as hybrids. They've had a lot of good luck. We've ordered gas vehicles because Ford cannot guarantee delivery of hybrids. Yeah, there's still, what we've been told, there's a lot of lithium is actually mined in Ukraine around the world, and that's been putting a little dent in the hybrid market. So to be safe, we can't, the original allotment nationwide, we'd have enough. The revised allotment, we may have enough, but we're fearful that once we order the vehicles and 2 months down the road, Ford would come back and revise the allotment again, and we'd be without vehicles. So we decided to go for this round for hybrid. One fleet we're looking at for EVs, which will work out great for us, is our detective fleet for the police department. We have about 6 vehicles, and we replace those every 10 years. And so those are coming up in about 3 or 4 years. And we think that's going to make a lot of sense for us to go EV in that area.
Now, you're replacing a lot of rifles. What do you do with the ones that are being replaced? Where do those go?
I'd have to defer it to the chief. I don't know if you had that discussion with him.
I don't know. Sometimes they get a trade-in, towards the purchase of the new ones. And I think recently they did some pistols that way. So it's possible that we will get a little bit of money back for those.
And then it looks like we're also getting a water tanker for this 24?
For the fire department?
Yes.
That actually was ordered this past year, or actually this current year. And we currently have a tanker at Central and an engine, and so they're going to buy a combination vehicle, replace 2 vehicles with one, and put that at one of the outlying stations outside of the hydrant district.
Are they capable of using that water as potable water?
I'm sorry?
Are they capable of using water in those tankers, like stainless steel, and are they portable water?
Yeah, they do.
And my last question, looking through all of this here, I don't see anything on here for plans for Abercourt.
Yeah, both.
financing.
Well, there's 2 things. We're waiting to have that schedule finalized, and of course, it's in litigation currently.
Right.
So there's going to be that. There's also going to be, when we expanded the Gateway TIF, the Ash Street TIF district into the Gateway TIF district, we also had one of the goals, intermodal transportation. So we're actually planning on paying the town share to finish off the rail trail north of the Exit 4A corridor to the Londonderry line using some TIF funds, but we're going to pop that in the plan once we get a better idea of the construction schedule for Contract B, which is the contract between the Londonderry line and the post office.
Okay, well, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, I noticed that on the chart that shows the annual net tax impact for 23, it's 108. It peaks out at 123 in 26 and goes back down to 112 in 2028. I wonder if you could give us a little color on what's driving that slow ramp up between now and 26 and why it kind of settles back down afterwards.
Yeah, if you look at the chart, I brought it back up for you folks. You look at the debt service, and the debt service is a little uneven. Well, from 23 to 24, it's a lot uneven. That's when we put in the culverts and the central fire. But then it's just a function of reducing debt service. Also, lease payments impact that as well, because we have, I don't know how many different schedules we have now of lease payments, probably 5 or 6.
I would say at least that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, which run between 1 to 5 years and 1 to 10 years. So as they drop off and drop on, that's the impact on. So what we find out, though, is that we move through the plan. As you know, the plan is refined every year. As we move through the plan, then that number becomes even more stable as opposed to jumping up 3 or 4 cents between years.
Anybody else? Mr. Grenese?
Done? I don't know if Mr. Nelson was done.
I'm done.
Oh, all right. Evening, I just want to, this is awesome, thank you for the presentation. I just want to touch base on the police cruisers, because I order the vehicles for my department. I just ordered 100 2023 Explorer Interceptors. I got 50 of them. Hybrids, we already have 20 of them. In the fuel saving is about, I did the math, it's going to be about 30% fuel saving with the hybrids.
Yep.
And we did the same thing with unmarked. We went with the Escape EVs, and because they usually sit there, same thing. So I just want to say that's a great idea. And we deal with MHQ. I don't know if this Derry deals with them.
So if you can reserve 12 of those for us, it'd be great.
Yeah, we get them black, but
Well, they need to be white.
yeah. No, I just want to say, it's a great idea. It's a huge fuel saving, and we did it for the past like 2 years. And I sat down, and because that's one thing I do in my job, and I told my boss, the sheriff, I said, hey, this is what we're going to save in gas. He was like, get the hybrids.
Right.
So staff took a little bit to get used to it because they turn off, turn on, but it's a great cost saving.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Myers does have his hand raised.
Okay, bringing Andy Myers on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, thank you. I apologize that I couldn't be there this evening. I had a slight emergency in my house, and I didn't want to leave. And I'd like to thank the town manager for coming over and giving us this great update. I just had one question, and that is, with all the money that we hear coming out of Washington, D.C. with the $1 trillion infrastructure bill and other bills that have been passed with a very large amount of money. Has Derry actively looked at the grant process to get some of that money here in Derry? I know that Berlin in the news apparently got money to heat their sidewalks, and I believe Keene got some money. I'm not sure what for. Has Derry tried to get some of that funding from Washington?
Okay, thanks for the question. There are 2 large buckets of funds. One is the ARPA funds, of which it's distributed via formula. Now, there's only 5 entitlement communities in New Hampshire. And the entitlement designation goes back to the old HUD days, or HUD grants, 20 and 30 years ago. And those are Manchester, Nashua, Portsmouth, Dover, and Rochester. As an example, we are a non-entitlement community. We're the 4th largest community, and we received about $3.6 million in ARPA funds. Portsmouth has a population of 22,000 and received $12 million because they're an entitlement community. So of that 3.6, we have allocated, what we did is recognizing that we did take a hit on revenues for our operating budget, is that we've allocated over a 5-year operational projection, same thing as a CIP, on the operations side, we have earmarked about half of that to replace our revenues, using more on the front end, less on the back end, so when the funding expires, we have to have it expended by 12/31/25, that we don't end up with a heck of a revenue shortfall. The rest of the money, the 1.8, we have about $750,000, which is currently unallocated. I suspect that the council will allocate that through their budget process this coming year, and $1 million of that was allocated for the Central Fire Station project.
Any further questions, Mr. Myers?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. Is that money specifically from the infrastructure bill that was passed, I believe it was mid last year, I believe it was in the summer, and it was in the area of $1 trillion. Is any of that money from that bill?
That infrastructure funds goes directly to the states. And so we have to look at competitive grants to the state to receive some of those funds.
I understood that Berlin got some specifically for their sidewalks.
Yeah, I'll look at that, Andy. I suspect it may be a CMAQ grant through the state, federal money through the state, but we can investigate what pot of money Berlin secured for their sidewalks. I'm just not familiar with that project.
I'm sorry, I was just wondering if Berlin got that money quickly from the bill that was passed last summer. I was just wondering if there's a deadline for communities like Derry to apply for that money.
Yeah, one thing they could have secured it from, again, I'm not familiar, is the congressionally directed appropriations, which is the earmark process. And so in the last couple of years, is that there's a number of federal agencies in which they were directed by Congress to take 1% of their capital investment and set it aside for earmarks. That could be the project. Now, here in Derry, last year, we received a $500,000 grant from the Department of Energy to lower the cost further of the energy produced at our solar fields. And this past year, as you see, we received that $3.2 million grant. And just today, in fact, there was a seminar with Senator Shaheen's office looking at potential projects for the next fiscal year, which are due at the Senator's office in about 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Any other follow-ups, Andy?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. McCachran?
So I see, and thank you for the presentation, Dave. Quick question, I know it looks like you're repurposing the downtown ball field that was, I believe, the adult softball field.
Right.
Where are they going?
No, that's, it's my understanding it's a church group. I know Rec has had conversations with them. I'm not quite sure where they're going, but it's not a Derry-specific group. It's a regional group.
Right.
Some Derry players, but a lot of people from out of town, too. So we work with Derry baseball, and they put on a strong pitch. They really need that field for their needs, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just more curious, because I know adult softball plays there, and I know the Derry Rec has something to do with it. Thank you.
And I have one final question, unless somebody else wants to join in. On one of the areas on the sheet for bonds, I saw exit 4A quickly on there. It said 3.5 million. I thought we expended all the money. We still got some in reserve, especially after what I saw today with judiciary. It looks like exit 4A could be delayed another 10 months.
Yeah. Of the $5 million allocated, we have not expended 200. Is it still 299?
It's about $300,000.
Okay.
That's what we have left. Exit 4A, we bonded an amount, I think it was 2.3 of that bond. The previous funds were appropriated through the council appropriation process. So the $5 million, we've bonded less than half of it. But once we expend that $300,000, our $5 million share is totally allocated and spent.
Okay, very good. And seeing no other further questions, the presentation was good. I'm glad hopefully people at home will see all the hard work you guys do down here. So I thank you, and we don't have to vote or anything, right?
Nope.
Nope.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, going on to the next item. It's the first extension request, PID 05039, 74 Rockingham Road, Keystone, Derry. George, you want to give us a little background on this?
Mr. Chairman, that's the mixed-use project on Rockingham Road, across from Winter Hill, Sunset Acres Development, South Range area, so that's on the north side of Rockingham Road. And they want to get an extension. This is their first request. So staff would recommend it. We have no issue with it.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Oh, should I read this?
Any other further questions?
Let
Yeah,
me
you're going to read this.
Mr. Chairman, let me read this, sorry. Move to approve a 6-month extension of conditional approval granted on August 17, 2022 by Keystone Dairy LLC, PID 05039, 74 Rockingham Road. The new expiration date will be August 17th, 2023.
Okay, we have
still
a
second.
motion, and we have a second on that. No further questions. Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Grenice?
Yes.
Mr. Malaby?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
And the chair votes
Don't forget
yes.
Mr. Myers.
Oh,
Andy?
Yes.
Oh, there you go, yes. Thank you. I see him now, he's on the screen. That one passes. The next one is another voluntary merger, PID 07008, 213 Island Pond Road, and PID 07008-002, 211.5 Island Pond Road.
Same thing, Mr. Chairman. I think it's pretty straightforward. Voluntary merger. This is down off of Island Pond Road, across from Ballard Pond area, Drake Lane. You can see they're combining lot 07008-002 to 07008. There's no building involved in this. Staff would recommend approval.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
If I see no one up for discussion, I'd like to make a motion, move to approve pursuant RSA 674:39A alpha, the voluntary merger of PID 07008, 213 Island Pond Road, and PID 07008-002, 11.5 Island Pond Road, parcel 07008-002 will be deleted, and parcel 07008 will be retained.
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Second.
Further questions? Seeing none, starting off with Mr. Mears.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Grenice.
Yes.
Mr. McEachran.
Yeah.
Mr. Malaby.
Yes.
Mr. Nelson.
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that passes. Next item on the agenda is Planning Director and Chairman updates. Mr. Director has...
I'm not sure. Oops, sorry. I'm not sure I have anything. March 1st.
Always have something.
Well, I know. I spoke a lot this morning at the Chamber of Commerce event, which
Mentioned
John
that, too. That
attended,
was
by
pretty
the way,
good.
so that was good. Thank you. I have nothing other than our next meeting is March 1st. We have no plans, so we were wondering if you don't want to hold a meeting that night. I know with the elections coming up the following week that we have some people that their terms expire March 31st, so I don't know if they want to let Sheila Bodenrader know if to put their names in. But do you want to hold, we have to have a meeting on the 15th of March, that's a definite, we will be having that, but do you want to have a meeting on March 1st?
No, I talked to Liz briefly. We'll make a final decision in a little bit.
Okay, perfect. I just want that for the record, just to get it out there.
yeah, I just, the thing I jumped the gun on, that we're not having a workshop on, we need to schedule that at some point, so we may want to use that day for,
Davis, for
Yeah.
the workshop.
yeah.
Okay,
I'm okay with that. No, that's a great idea.
are you finished? You got anything else?
Yeah, no, I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I got two items I want to bring up. Remember, we did get an email from Liz regarding the various workshops and discussion topics. We have like 10 of them. So I know that Dave Nelson and I are going to be working on the, what are we talking about? The housing workshop, the workforce housing. And so there's some other ones. I'm also going to get myself involved in the short-term rental ordinance. That's an issue that's starting to pop up. We probably have 5 or 6 of them in Derry, based on the pictures I saw when I went online. And it's Beaver Lake, it's Scobie Pond, it's Corbett's Pond, and Island Pond. So again, we got that there we can still, take a look at, maybe after the election. The other one is another reminder. We have a spring 2023 Planning and Zoning Conference. That's coming up somewhere in April, and it's just a heads up. And so we'll probably get another warning in another couple of weeks ago, just to keep in mind, because these are definitely pretty good conferences, and we have to fulfill our needs under the policy too, as far as attending one of the courses. And so that completes what I have to say. We're going to go into a workshop mode, And the workshop will be number 3, to discuss the wording of Article, what's that, 19? Independent Adult Community Overlay District in relation to 8.
John, get a look at George.
Yeah, Monsieur, I apologize, sorry. Would you be willing to maybe change this, the order of business? Because looking at the folks in the audience.
Sure.
Everybody here is related to the second workshop, which is the downtown zoning.
I
We
thought
sent
they come to see
butter
us.
notices out to the, what's that?
I thought they just came to see us.
Oh, yeah. We sent.
hang out with us?
They hang out on a Wednesday night, I know, it's,
Future prospective board
We have
members.
no food or coffee, I apologize, so, no pizza.
We're on a tight
But,
budget. We'll switch it. So
yeah,
what
only
we'll be
'cause
doing is,
most of the folks I hear, and I think we can answer their questions quickly because it's not going to impact most of the property owners, but we did send notices out to the property owners in the downtown. We've had some people call us and stop in, so these folks are here for that second workshop.
all right, so for official notice, so the workshop will be number 4, to continue discussions regarding proposed changes to the Town of Derry zoning ordinance, Article 6, the district provisions, Section 165-49, traditional business overlay district, specifically the dimensional requirements in the district. And for further little background that I think George will probably be bringing up too, is some of the board members did a site walk last Saturday, reviewing the various areas, and that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. Anything you want to add to that, George?
No, I think the only thing, and I know some of the folks in the audience, I think that the calls that we received in the office, we had a few, not many, and we had a couple of people come in, and based on the Saturday morning sidewalk, that most of this amendments are going to be for dimensional requirements and setbacks, so we're not changing the zoning in the sense of what you're doing. Like I know as example, people from I think the Baptist Church are here.
Nice job.
And I think Leo and Tammy are here. They own the business on the corner of Birch and Broadway. So some of the lots are not going to change. That was a big question, like what are we doing basically? So I try to explain that the uses and the setbacks of all the buildings that are downtown are not going to change on anything that we're doing tonight. It's to go back and look at the dimensions and the setbacks, particularly on the side streets based on the Saturday morning sidewalk. So there are folks at home that wanted to know what we were doing. So for the record, it's more dimensional setbacks, okay? I apologize. You're not from the church, I don't think. Sorry. Okay.
No, do the people in the audience have the availability of getting this type of chart?
Yeah, we put stuff in the back table, so you have the handout, you have the maps.
There's a map of the TBOD, but not the
it wasn't
colored
showing
one.
the
The
scene.
colored one can be put up.
Yeah, we have the colored map we can
Yeah,
put
we
up on the
just have a
screen.
map of the TBOD in the back of the room, the one that you had at the site walk. And this one just shows what the uses are on the various lots.
So the folks at home, just for a quick explanation, Mr. Chair, if I may, and then I'll let the board
Please.
open it up. For the people at home that may be watching and looking at the map, and the same thing in the audience, what we're looking at is basically Derry, the downtown Derry, beginning along Broadway at the corner of Crystal Ave at the Baptist Church. Then we head north up to Pearl Street. You take a left, and then you look at the side streets at home, which would be Franklin, McAllister Court, the Town Hall, and the Courthouse to Manning Street. Continuing west, to Martin Street, and then down to the Opera House, the Adams Memorial Building, ending at Maple Street, across from Betts Hall, crossing over the street to where the Halligan's Tavern and Rigatoni's is located, some of you Realty, and then heading again southbound down Central Street to Sawyer Court, Abbott Court, South Avenue, and then continuing east again to Railroad Avenue, North Ave, Wall Street to Bird Street. That's our traditional business overlay along Broadway, and then we call that Central Business District. So what we're trying to do is look at the setback dimensional requirements. When you look at Broadway, from the Baptist Church down to the Opera House and then across the street, most of those lots are what you call traditional downtown. The lots front right on the sidewalk, they have 0 setbacks. That's how many older downtowns develop. That's what we like to retain to keep the character of that street. That's why it's called traditional business overlay. When we try to apply some of that zone to the side streets, north and south of Broadway, in the real world, literally, it did not work very well on the setbacks. So we think we may need to change that. And we have We had a site walk this past Saturday morning to look at both sides of Broadway, and you can see the difference is obviously to try to apply these dimension setbacks that really do not work in the real world based on a couple of conceptual plans that we've looked at. So for the people at home, if you have a business there now, we're not changing any of the uses, whether it's residential, commercial. We're not changing the setbacks. If your building is there for the next 50 years and you sit near the road on Wall Street, as an example, you'll be allowed to continue. Someday, if somebody comes in and buys properties or tears them down and wants to rebuild, they may have to comply to some of the new setbacks that the board comes up with. And that's what we're going to work on over the next couple of months. So based on that, Mr. Chairman, I'll open it up to the board, and you guys can talk about what we did Saturday morning and your thoughts.
So, anybody wishing to start? Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I think it was great to actually get out there and look at the properties. I'll quickly reprise some of my thoughts for the home audience and the folks who are here at the hearing. The traditional business overlay district started back when we had the Main Street Corporation, we had the Downtown Derry Committee, we did several public visioning charrettes. The idea was to create a streetscape. We hired an architectural consultant, Ruben Ehring out of Dover, and we wanted to preserve the traditional 1900s, retail storefront, walkable, consumer-friendly downtown. Now, every town is different. Londonderry doesn't necessarily have that kind of infrastructure, where we have a section of Broadway that looks more like Nashua or Manchester, with brick edifice buildings and sidewalks, and the building come out to the sidewalk and fair amount of glass display windows, and it just kind of looks like a classic old New England mill town, and we wanted to preserve that. We noticed also that at one point there had been a fire, and we have the mini strip mall where Cumberland Farms is, because that's what was the development style at that time when it was redeveloped. And we said, we don't want mini strip malls. We want it to look like an urban neighborhood. And so that's why we came up with the zero minimum, setback. You have to have your building on the sidewalk. You can't build a mini strip mall. Subsequently, the district was expanded to other parts of the central business district, I suspect with the intent of hopefully getting a more vibrant business community on the back streets, as well as simply on the main throughway of Broadway. But there were some unintended consequences, and so now the board is deciding, what do we do to fix those unintended consequences where it just doesn't make sense. I don't want to change the rules that apply for Broadway. I don't think we ought to be creating carve-outs for people who want to create more Comby Farms style development on Broadway, if there is that redevelopment. But on the side streets where the current use is primarily residential and will likely continue to be residential for a long time to come, and if there's expansion or rebuilding, as in the case of a house that had a fire, in enforcing the 0-foot front setback probably is just not reasonable, and that's why we're proposing to put in a conditional use permit process, so that if you have one of those parcels and the rules as written for the districts just don't make sense and aren't equitable and create a hardship, then we have a process to grant a waiver. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Very good. Anybody else wishing to speak?
Excellent summary.
Very good.
We did do a site walk on Saturday, as Mr. Nelson said, and I concur with everything David said. I think the only thing that we discussed, in full disclosure to everybody here and at home in the audience, was exactly what David said, looking at Broadway and not changing anything on Broadway, which would include the lots those buildings are on. The real question becomes, if you go from Broadway back all the way to Pearl Street, there's multiple other properties back there. The question becomes, where do you now draw the line for the traditional business overlay district? It does go from Broadway to Pearl. Our discussions on Saturday were, does that make sense? I think to a person, we all decided keep it on Broadway. The question is now, where do you change it back to a more residential flavor, which is what's back there. So that's primarily what we'll be discussing. And again, the same holds true for the other side of the street. I'll call it the Mary Ann's side of the street. So same thing, all those first lots. I don't think there's no intention from anybody here that I heard on Saturday to change that traditional, as David stated. The question is, how far back do we go do we go all the way back to North and South Ave? Which is kind of what it is now.
that's where a
and
lot-
where does it make sense?
So, yeah, there were
That's what we're
two mechanisms. One is leave the district boundaries exactly the way they are and add a conditional use permit process to provide for exceptions. Or review that and decide that, well, maybe we should go back to the traditional business overlay district being what it was and create new districts north and south of that better reflect in the black letter law rules what we expect folks to need in one of those parcels. So either way, I think works. It's probably easier to draft and implement the conditional use permit process if there's some time pressure, because then we don't have to actually come up with all of the wording for additional districts. So, and I'm not married necessarily to either approach, but
If you look at the document, one approach maybe, if everybody's online with this, is you look at section 165-49, and you look at the bottom of the page, it's workshop number 4, February 15, and Liz has taken the comments that a lot of us have made and rewrote some of the TBOD district. And one thought maybe, like on the first page 1, item number 3 that's in red is that we read that, discuss it a little bit, and if we're kind of in sync, leave it there and move on to the next one. And because that goes into what Dave is looking at, is the conditional.
I'll be happy to volunteer to read that, and I think it actually does capsulize everything that we've said so far. So this is under the purpose, and there are existing 1 and 2 sections. Section 3 says, the lots in this district are unique, particularly those that do not front on East or West Broadway. In order to properly protect the life, safety, and welfare of residents and visitors in this district, deviations from the dimensional requirements shall be by conditional use permit. The planning board has the authority to waive dimensional requirements for development and redevelopment purposes to ensure proper site distance and access to and from the lots. The planning board shall not approve a conditional use permit unless the applicant clearly demonstrates and the board finds the following. A, requiring compliance with the particular provision for granting of the conditional use permit would create an unnecessary hardship, and B, the application would still be consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Requests must be written, and the planning board must vote on each request at a duly noticed public meeting.
And I would just like to follow up a little bit on that. What gives the planning board the authority to be able to do that is under the innovative land use controls, it's RSA 64:16, Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2. So that is set that we can move forward on this here. So should we go to the next item, or if people want to discuss this? Mr. Chase.
I just have a comment on it, and I agree with Mr. Nelson. I think this is the best option for covering what we discussed on Saturday, in that part of the discussion was, as we had said on Franklin Street, if the building that had burned was the next one down, it stood a much better chance of being developed as a mixed use. I would hate to revert back to, as Mr. Nelson put it, the black letter of the law, which would now circumvent that. If somebody did decide to even buy that piece of property and develop it that way, they wouldn't be able to do it, black letter of the law. Whereas this way, the opportunity is still there to develop those, to extend the downtown, as we had talked about, making it walkable. And so I like this much better than reverting back to black letter of the law. I think this covers it very well.
Good.
Would you like to continue on to the next one? You're doing
So I have, yeah, I will, but I'll issue two comments in between. I think the next set of letters, I think it effectively says over again what the first one says, and I'm a little leery about having duplicate provisions that attempt to do the same thing, because sometimes that causes unintended consequences and loopholes. So
What's the purpose, though?
yeah, one is the purpose, but it gives specific, criteria and mechanisms. So maybe we need to work on the wording so that we don't actually
Maybe move it back.
have the procedure
I would almost
specified in two
suggest
places.
I would also almost suggest that the procedure that's written, you almost want an A, B, and C here. The planning board, so you want to say deviations, dimensions shall be by conditional use permit, period. That's the end of the paragraph, and then you can say, per the following, the planning board shall not approve conditional use permits unless the applicant clearly demonstrates the following. And one of the following items would literally, read to ensure proper site distance and access to and from lots. That's almost that statement there, Liz, which is in the beginning, is almost one of the things is a reason for us to do it. So I would almost pull that out from the paragraph and put that as A, and then A becomes B, B becomes C.
The other thing I will note is we also talked about not only the dimensional requirements, I mean, having to put your single-family house, right on the road, because there is no sidewalk there for some reason, is not the only potential hardship, because it says on the facing page, residential use should not be permitted below the second floor. It requires mixed uses. So I'm wondering if the scope of the conditional use permit needs to extend beyond simply the dimensional requirements and also some of the use requirements, to the extent that we're trying to preserve existing residential uses.
That could almost be a D, saying, in addition to the dimensional requirements, the board.
Well, that house on Pearl Street, we had to go get a variance to have.
But what I'm saying, I think I'm agreeing with David. I think there's probably an A, B, C, D here under number 3, and D would be, it's not just dimensions, it's also, we can issue a conditional use permit, to keep in mind the district and what character and all the other items that David was mentioning. That's another element to allow us to use the permit.
Yeah, Liz wanted to make a comment, I believe.
My only comment would be that, as we found in the West Runningbrook district, the planning board can't regulate uses because that falls under the jurisdiction of, any deviation falls under the jurisdiction of the zoning board. So we can use conditional use permit for anything in the zoning ordinance other than uses.
Is that what it says in the innovative land use control statute?
That came from advice of council when we were going through the West Runningbrook, because we wanted control of the uses in the West Runningbrook, and we were told that was the one thing we couldn't.
Hearing that,
Although we can provide comment before it goes to, but then that creates a hardship for residents.
One of the statements I made is if we have a zoning ordinance that people have to go and get variances in order to do reasonable things in large numbers, we didn't do our job right.
Correct.
So we need to fix that, and if we cannot use the conditional use permit mechanism to allow, for example, residential uses on the first floor in some of those legacy single-family or even multifamily residential homes, then I'm going to sort of suck my words back and say maybe what we should do is just differentiate by actually creating different districts with different rules. The western facade front of Broadway, which is what I used to nickname it, versus the back streets, the back lot, because I think that we need to be able to control both. And so now I'm thinking, given that legal interpretation, we probably need to sort of roll back and do have an alibi, have a reconsideration of, do we really want all of those lots to be under the same conditions and usage rules as the businesses that front Broadway.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chase.
They already have it, because these lots are filled. And say something happens, as is the house on the corner, they have a set amount of time to rebuild the way that it was, without having to go for a variance of that. If you go over that time limit is when they run into trouble. But we already have that mechanism in our zoning. That house
Okay.
burnt, they have a set amount of time, which is reasonable, to rebuild it the way back that it was.
So if
They
they
were
have,
looking to go up to townhouses, and they went through 4 variances. They got 3 variances.
Right, because they were
They were
changing.
changing it. They weren't rebuilding
Oh, I
the
see what
yellow
you're
house.
They weren't going back to a single-family house.
Single-family house,
Right.
They were changing.
You can
to-
rebuild as is
as is.
within, I believe it's a year. 12 months. They've got a year to rebuild it, or at least start the process to rebuild it as it was, with no problem.
Yeah, I want to say there's a certain percentage they have to have done within a year. I'm not even sure the whole thing's got to be done.
Substantial completion, so.
Is it
Yeah.
completion?
Is it, or up to building permit, I think.
Sorry, I apologize for the wreck, 'cause I'm off the mic. It's like Randy said, you have 12 months. If you apply for the building permit,
Yeah.
you have to do, at least get the permit applied for within the 12 months.
Then you have to have substantial completion within a set amount of time after that. So the mechanism is already there.
Yeah, if something happens, you can put exactly what's there back. Now, in your case, what you're saying, John, is the folks that had, the house we looked at had burnt, were looking to change the entire lot and put up
3 townhouses.
Right.
It's not a single-family home.
Right.
And all the lots are, the only other way that it would affect it is if it was an empty lot.
Yeah.
And none of those streets have empty lots on them.
Yeah, I don't think we saw it. There's
No.
not a single empty, well, the only empty lots we have are all parking lots.
Yes,
And I want to say, were they all town-owned parking lots?
yes. Except
for
Mary Ann's.
Mary Ann's, right? I think the other.
So if Mary Ann's had wanted to-
and the VFW. Yeah, the bank,
Right.
The martial arts.
bank, Mary Ann's, and then,
So if they decided they wanted to take out their parking lot and put in a building in there, they'd have to comply with the TBOD regulations for uses. That's the only reason why. Nobody's going to get cheated out of their single-family home because something happens to it.
so the time pressure here is because of the yellow house that burned.
Yeah.
And because they didn't want to simply rebuild it on the current footprint.
they wanted to do.
Exactly.
They wanted to do something else.
Yep.
And they didn't get enough variances to do it.
Right.
So now it comes to us.
Correct. So now the question becomes, as we discussed in the site walk, do we do the conditional use permits and not alter the district boundaries? Or do we alter the district boundaries back to Broadway only and maybe a couple of other lots as we discussed walking? And if we alter the boundaries, then the question becomes, as an example, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn for the board, we were looking at the stuff that abutted Pearl Street and putting them back into something. Now, the question becomes, what does that go back into, right? Because that'd be north of Pearl Street, so between Pearl and Rollins,
CBD.
MH what? No, north of Pearl, going up to the Hood Pond. MHDR. Right. So the question really becomes, does a couple of lots south of Pearl, a couple of house lots there, now go back into MHDR? Because I don't think we'd carve out another district. You wouldn't make a slice of something else.
No.
So the real question becomes is that Pearl Street area that we're looking at, I can actually do it on the map here. The yellow south of Pearl Street, over to that right away, those half a dozen lots there, what do those become? And then again, you have on Crystal Ave, that commercial property, right? Like the red one.
I still like the conditional use.
I mean, we can
Well,
sit
a
here
small
and-
amount of property.
There's CBD in between. I don't think we want to
Oh,
have islands.
CBD, it's not MHDR.
We don't want to have islands of zones.
Right.
not
I like the
MHDR.
conditional use.
Well, hold on.
I apologize.
'Cause I'm looking north of Pearl to
North-
Rollins, says
yeah.
CBD on this paper map.
Yeah, CBD goes up to Rollins and Lennox to where Walgreens and Rite Aid is.
Right.
And anything where Hood Pond on the north side of Rollins is MHDR.
So in CBD,
maybe-
we allow single-family homes, because that's everything that's there, right?
Yes.
Okay, so.
And then Maple Street over to the left, Jim, that's also MHDR, that part of Maple Street towards where the old mill used to be.
Yep. Yeah, but it's actually CBD, Courthouse Lane all the way over to Crystal, between Pearl and Rollins.
Jesus, that's correct.
Yeah, all right. Sorry. So the question then becomes, do those yellow lots become CBD? And
well-
how does that affect anything?
Well, the underlying zone is CBD, TBOD overlays it, so they are CBD already.
Okay, so
So
already
if you just, if you move the TBOD boundary, then they do have single-family hotels, bed and breakfast, blah, blah.
So, I mean, that seems to be another option, is to constrict the TBOD overlay a little bit.
Yeah.
Bigger than it was when it was just the
Just
strip.
Broadway, right.
Just Broadway,
right.
but not where it doesn't really fit the character of the neighborhood.
Right, and that's, so the first time we did this years ago, we just used the natural streets, because you can see it. I mean, you did it by street here. Now we're just saying, okay, over time, it didn't develop the way we wanted. Now we got to your point, Dave, pull it back a little and say, okay, how far back do you pull it back? And I think that was right? Is that pretty much what we discussed on Saturday?
I mean, I think that takes more work, it takes more due diligence, but it seems to be perhaps a longer-lasting solution that somebody won't come back to us with some problem that the conditional use permit doesn't solve, and we go, oh, we got to do it again.
Unintended consequences.
It's the unintended consequences, yeah. I mean, sometimes it could be more restrictive by just totally moving the line and making it, to Dave's point, black and white. But that also then gets rid of it's subject to interpretation, and you get an unintended consequence by doing a conditional use purpose, right? So black and white may be a little tougher, but you can always alter that if the case is, but conditional use purposes tend to be a lot more lax and subject to a lot more interpretation. It's subject to a lot more interpretation in whomever is sitting up here.
Because if not, then it's going to go to the zoning board first.
Yeah, but it's subject to whomever's sitting up here. I mean, otherwise, if you do the hard line, and Randy's mentioned it too, it becomes black and white, but people also can utilize the zoning board process if they feel they've been aggrieved. And they can go try and get the exemptions from the zoning board. So it's not like you stop from doing anything. It's just that there's a different process.
Somebody wave your mouse. There you go.
Go ahead, Ann. So I'm thinking over there.
Yeah.
Does Andy have any comment? We've kind
Yeah,
of
I'm
blown Andy
still,
away.
no matter what you do, there's going to be unintended consequences. Now,
Correct.
back the other way, if you revert it back and chop it up, number one, now it's more difficult to interpret, well, this lot, that lot, what lot, whose lot, what can you do on?
More work for us.
And you go back to the hard line, now the other unintended consequences is you have somebody that comes along that wants to develop it, commercial on the first floor, and otherwise, and they want to put in a sidewalk, extend the sidewalk in front.
So I guess,
Now they got the same,
No, they go to the zoning board.
Well,
They go
which
to
is
the
what we
hard-
said we were trying to avoid people having to do.
is it true, and I should do my homework and answer my own question, but is it true that there's anything you can do in the TBOD overlay that you can't do in the underlying CBD?
Yes, your setbacks.
Well, no, setbacks are a mandatory thing. There's
Correct.
nothing in
So
the
in the
CBD that
TB
says you can't be up at the sidewalk, right?
If there's
Yes.
if there's a conflict, TBOD takes precedence over anything
Right,
else
but if you take it
underneath.
out of the TBOD, then you can't do that. If somebody wants, in the CBD,
There is a setback.
there is a setback. In the TBOD, the setback is the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Well, maybe-
TBOD takes precedence.
Yes, but we're talking about changing the
We're
lines
talking about taking
again.
it out of the TBOD.
We're back to changing the
So
lines.
maybe the way to do that is to change the lines back and then put a conditional use permit in the CBD that says, hey, if you want to behave like TBOD, we'll let you do that.
See, now we're back to what I had said in the beginning.
And that's a big, that, but
The conditional use
yeah.
permit is, I think, the way to go.
Yeah, because the CBD is a lot bigger district, so you
Yeah.
could have somebody north
Yeah.
of Rollins Street. Hey, I want to
For this small area that we're talking about, making this unintended consequences right, I think
yeah,
the conditional
CBD,
use
that would
permit is
be-
the way to go.
Because you got.
It's a small amount of lots
Runs
that
into
you're dealing
OBD.
with
Yeah.
compared to the CBD, and 99.9% of the issues are taken care of with conditional use.
All right, so I'm willing to be, pragmatic and say that, as we used to say in engineering, perfect is often the enemy of good enough.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe good enough is the language we've read tonight.
Yes.
Addressing just the setback issue, and anything else, we'll address it when it comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to maybe make a C, D, and E or something here and tighten up the language a little and put some options
We
in
can.
there. Obviously, using our guidance, Liz, of if there's some things we can't do, but
I mean,
that would seem to make the most sense at
I
this
think so.
point. Look, it changed once already right, the TBOD started at one thing, went to another thing.
Yep.
Now we're kind of pulling it back a little. Well, if we look at unintended consequences 4 years from now,
Right.
we can change it again. It does.
I think
not
this-
permanent.
what she's written is the easiest way to go, maybe with some tweaking. Yeah.
yeah, I mean.
But let me check, see if Andy has anything to
Okay,
say.
yeah.
I can't see him. Andy, you still there?
Yes, yes,
Is
yes.
there anything you want to add to the conversation that's going on over here? Since
Yeah,
you're
please,
up in
I-
the sky someplace?
Yeah, please, I raised my hand. I just wanted to let people know that I wasn't there on Saturday because I had another commitment, but don't
I
take
don't I
that
don't have
as,
hands.
don't take that as not interest. People that know me know that I have two offices, and one of them is at the corner of Birch and Broadway. And I walk up and down Broadway, the area where you folks walked on Saturday all the time, in the summer every day, and in the wintertime maybe only once or twice a week. But I walk the rail trail in that area, I walk Pearl Street, I walk North Avenue, South Avenue, so I'm very familiar with that area. I had a comment and a question. Question first, but then please come back to me for a comment. I thought someone this evening said that there were no more empty lots. There's two empty lots on Broadway. One is next to the Opera House, and the other one is on the east side of Mary Ann's, am I right?
That's on Broadway, though.
It's on Broadway.
On Broadway.
Yeah, that's on Broadway, next to Adam
And the old-
Memorial. Red Oaks owns that.
Yeah, they wouldn't change. They'd still be in TBOD.
Okay, but there are two empty spaces on Broadway.
Yes.
Yes.
We were talking the
Okay,
back
all right.
streets, Andy.
Oh, okay, all right, okay, I
So,
get it.
What I'd like to
the
do
other
is
thing
wrap this up at this point, so we don't get too far into the weeds.
He had a
Oh,
question, though. Didn't he have a question? Didn't Andy have something else to say? And then,
Yeah,
Yeah, he's got a comment.
He's got a comment.
Got a comment?
Yeah, the other
Andy?
comment I'd have is, I understand everything that Mr. Nelson is saying and Randy's saying, but I don't like the conditional use idea, especially hardship. Hardship has been reinterpreted and interpreted by the New Hampshire Supreme Court way too many times. I don't like that. There are hardship cases that penalize people that have real serious problems with dimensional use. And there are other hardship cases. One is in Portsmouth where one of the hotels was allowed to put up a sign, and not having a sign was a hardship. So I don't like hardship. I would vote against anything that had a hardship requirement. I'd like to reasonably accommodate anybody that wants to do something in either of those zones you're talking about. So that's it.
You were going to have Liz rewrite the language.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would ask you just to consider contracting the TBOD on that north side and bring it back just because in case it is more residential, and you're only allowed to have that multifamily residential with the mixed-use component in the TBOD. And I don't want anybody to be penalized if they decided they wanted to make a larger improvement to their lot. So just, if you just consider it. I like the idea of bringing it, contracting it a little so that it's back more on the frontage on that north side and keeping it more to the
Wouldn't you only have
south.
5 or 6 lots?
Yep.
That would be isolated, like an island on its own?
No, they'd be CBD.
So it would be retained
not
as CBD.
MHDR.
No,
Yeah.
they can't, so CBD. So the ones in yellow around Franklin, I believe is what Liz is talking about.
Yeah, those are all, if you contracted that, the yellow, the red on the corner, which is, that's the dental place.
Well, you can keep the red in the corner in TBOD.
Yeah, oh yeah, I guess you could, yeah. But
It's a carve-out.
yeah, if you would consider just contracting that however you felt appropriate. My gut is telling me we might be doing a disservice to the landowners on the north side by leaving it in the TBOD.
Which was what we discussed.
Correct.
On the walk on
Yeah.
Saturday.
Yeah.
Because when we walked the south side, we looked at everything there, and I think the only one that came up, it's shown here in white against the rail trail. We said, nah, just leave that where it is.
Yeah.
So we were already gonna, I don't think there was much discussion about doing much of anything to the south side, right?
No.
If I recall everybody's conversation, is that correct? I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. No? Okay. So, I think the real topic.
No, you're right.
I think the real topic is the carve-out at Pearl and possibly a carve-out of the 6 on Pillsbury and across from Walker Court that are all residential now. Because those are all homes. Everything right there where Owen's got his arrow. Because the Opera House is the big green on the bottom, right? Those are all apartments.
Honestly, if you're looking at the property the town owns that this building sits on,
Yep.
it doesn't matter what district it's
It
in.
really doesn't.
Because it's a governmental use and we're going to do what we want. So if the lines look neater and more reasonable by putting the town municipal center back in CBD, I'm not going to lose any sleep over that.
Yeah, you could actually get a nice cutout if you did that. You would actually have a nice straight line going across, wouldn't you? And you could do the same thing with the Adams. Just go up with the Adams green and you're done.
Right.
And that would make a nice, clean, for those of us in the engineering profession that like nice, clean lines. Right?
For squiggly.
To Dave's point, government buildings, the Adams Memorial Building and the Town Hall aren't going anywhere. It's kind of irrelevant what zone they're in. But it would make the map a lot
Stew on
neater.
that.
Okay, general consensus from the board to have a take a look at that?
Good idea, Dave.
You have any?
And I think that addresses Andy's.
I understand Andy's concern about conditional use permits and hardships, and I actually, in general, share that concern. And given the fact that there may be other hardships other than the setbacks, I think maybe what we should do is get a group together and come back with a drawing of a potentially reduced size TBOD based on these uses and what we saw on the site walk, and then talk over that.
That'd be
Okay.
fabulous.
That sounds good.
Andy, you okay with that?
Yeah, easier.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yes, that sounds
Okay, not a problem.
And, you know, we could spend some time when I come in on Wednesday mornings or whenever, you know,
Staff would appreciate,
willing to multitask.
Okay, Mr. Venese.
Hi. No, I was going to make a suggestion. I know this isn't a public hearing, it's a workshop, and normally workshops don't allow the public to ask questions or comments, but in the past we have. So I was going to ask you if the board would consider, because people did come out tonight on a beautiful night,
Does
and say
anybody-
30, if anybody had any quick
It's not an
comments or
official public
suggestions.
hearing, so if anybody wishing to say anything?
Give them a chance, because they're sitting out there, and
And just for the record, your name and address, please?
Something like this.
Good evening, David Barker. 64 East Derry Road in Derry. But I own the 3 buildings in back of the Opera House, and
CBD, and
I
then
know there was some mention of whether, I'm not quite sure, and maybe George can help. What gives the greatest flexibility? The traditional overlay zoning or the, what do they call it? The CBD?
It would be the CBD. That's the more broader zone. It allows more uses. The setbacks are more broader. The TBOD, real quickly, like Dave Nelson said, the TBOD, literally, David, was created with the frontage lots only, literally from the Baptist church, only fronting along Broadway to the Opera House, the other side of the road from Halligan's and Somerview, and only the fronts along Broadway. So they kept with traditional zero lot line. That's why they're built to the sidewalk. You barely have either no distance between buildings or 3 feet width. That's how downtowns were developed. So that's your most restrictive, based on, like David said, the character of downtowns. When you spread out on these side streets and up where you are, that central business, you can have more uses, broader setbacks. It's a little more broader, I guess, to answer your question. It's a little more flexible, if I'm correctly saying that.
You'd have more flexibility, David.
With what? CBD?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of Maple Street, like Jim asked earlier, Maple Street where you are is central business, so it's a wider use, broader. When you get up to where the old mill was, up the corner, that becomes the multifamily zone. It changes dramatically in the zone.
Thing is, it's so hard to try to envision how things are going to unfold in the years ahead. That's part of why you're wrestling with this.
Yeah.
And I try to figure it out as well. If you had asked me 15 years ago if, I didn't think, I thought things would look a lot different downtown than I didn't think it would stay as it has, but you never know what's going to happen. So I think I would opt for more flexibility somehow. Mm-hmm. I mean, what Mr. Nelson was mentioning, sometimes I get these, you said conditional use was what you used?
Yes.
Is that the term?
There is a term called conditional use permit.
But you were referring to the use as well as...
That's what kind of got me off on track, because apparently I assumed it was actually conditional with respect to the use, but I was corrected that apparently it's not in the way the law was written. So it can do things like dimensional requirements, area requirements, but it can't actually change the basic use of the land.
Yeah, which was the first floor.
So by going, what we had just talked about, David, was taking the Opera House.
Yeah.
The lots that you own, which, good, it's up here in yellow. So that green and all the yellow that goes over to Pillsbury, those are all homes. That
Well,
would go
the
back
minor
to...
apartment buildings, yeah.
Homes.
Yeah.
That goes back to CBD,
Residential.
the Central Business District, which has much more flexibility for the people that own those 6 or 7 yellow lots. In addition, we just talked to is that those that, thank you, Owen. Owen's ahead of me. All those lots, which are all homes, including the 2 town-owned lots to the left, all of those would go back.
Yeah, those are more single-family.
Correct.
Off of Pearl, right?
Which is a
Now-
lot, which both single and multifamily are allowed.
Yeah.
But you've got more flexibility, Dave.
I mean, I always thought that the idea of building right up to the sidewalk isn't a bad idea.
No.
I mean, because on Maple Street, I have a sidewalk.
Yeah.
I know on Franklin, which is the parcel you're wrestling with, there's no sidewalk.
But the houses are set back
Right.
and not on what would be the sidewalk.
But if those were to disappear for some reason, could you still build up to the sidewalk if it turned out that that was the best configuration for the use of that land?
In the CBD,
Yes.
No.
They'd have to go for variance
Then you couldn't.
for variance,
to the zoning board.
for the zoning board.
Yeah.
They
We were
could be
trying to-
allowed, they could allow it, but you have to go to a variance. But if you stay traditional business district, the overlay, which you are now, you would be forced to do that, and that may not be the best economical use for the property.
Yeah.
So it's, You know, which side of the fence are you going to fall on?
So if you could come up with a phrase, going back to what Mr. Nelson was saying, that provides the greatest flexibility in terms of use and dimensions, but you said you're limited on use.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I mean, we have to follow state law. I mean, that's just the bottom line of it. And conditional use permit is a very flexible thing that allows the planning board to do some of the things that in the old days you used to have to go to the zoning board for. But apparently not everything. And the issue we're talking about now is in CBD, there is a minimum enforceable setback of somebody X feet.
Yeah, some.
In the TBOD, there is a maximum setback of 0 feet. And we could put a conditional use permit in either of those districts to allow that to be waived at the discretion of the planning board.
Yeah, plus there's the first floor use.
That we can't control by a conditional use. That has to be controlled by the terms of the district and the zoning ordinance and approved by the town council as a town ordinance. We can't waive that.
But the zoning board could.
They can grant a variance if they choose to, yeah.
Variance, yeah.
So you're better off being in CBD for more flexibility, and anything that needs to be changed would still be agreed through the zoning process.
And then deal with the zoning board.
Yeah, I mean, either way, you're going to have to deal with them potentially.
Frontage.
But
All
to
right.
provide you more opportunities and more options, again, those yellows and greens are better off being in
So
CBD.
the chair has just pointed out that in the CBD, the minimum front yard size is 50 feet.
So,
Yikes.
It was a 10-foot setback.
no, with the 10-foot setback.
I'm not on, those are the dimensional things we need to look at, because it doesn't work in the real world.
Yeah, because there isn't a single home in the CBD.
Oh, I
that's
read
50
minimum
feet.
frontage.
Yeah, minimum frontage.
Okay, I
It's
got
a
that wrong.
10-foot setback. It's okay.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much.
That's what we're wrestling with,
Yeah,
David.
yeah, well, good luck.
My iPad fixed. Sir, you want to come up? And again, if you state your name and address, appreciate
I
it.
can assure you,
Thank you.
we won't get it 100% right.
So good night, good evening. My name is Jerry Kapatanakis. I'm at both 10 and 12 Franklin Street.
10 and 12, are you red, yellow, what are you, Jerry?
10 and 12 is the yellow.
Yellows. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right, thank you.
Yep, I was trying to get the corner one as well, but the earlier owner lost my phone number apparently. But, oh well. So, just so you know, I figured that the house that's burnt, which I believe is 16 Franklin Street, was what was driving this meeting. Because I was there when they approved the 3 townhouses, which I guess you all know, they're going to put up 3 condo townhouses. I don't know, that's all old news, but my concern here is, because, and you mentioned it, with the 50-foot setback, or the 50-foot, the dimensions that are the issue here, and you may basically punt this to the planning board or the zoning commission, or whatever they're called. But right now, my main concern is you mentioned the character of that area of the town, and one big area that's going to be affected that I'm concerned about is snow removal. Once they shoehorn in those 3 houses, where are we putting the snow? I mean, we've already had 3 separate houses go to war with snow removal. Now we're changing, current dimensions so that they're going to be shoeing in 3 more houses, no more places for snow. Is that factored into your decision-making at all here with this?
We didn't allow them.
Well, I know, but you're
It
looking
wasn't
at...
our decision to allow them to do that.
I know, but he mentioned dimensions, and other people have mentioned dimensions, and...
The dimensions we're talking about are already pre-existing in the central business district, which is what that zone's been for a million years. All we did was overlay the traditional business district to it, which actually is much more restrictive, as David Nelson
Right,
pointed out.
but that
it's zero
property isn't
setback.
able to proceed right now.
All we're doing is going back to what it had been for,
My understanding is the property can't proceed now with the 3 houses until they get you to make this change.
no, that's not true.
Well, they get denied that last variance, which is why they're here.
Denied a variance.
They can proceed, but they would have to proceed at the 0 lot line, and snow removal was one of the things we looked at, as well as like the site distance and all of that, because at the 0, they're right on the pavement,
Which they still have to deal with.
which they still have to deal with, right,
Yeah, the parking lot's in the back.
But this, regardless, I think, of whether that came up or not, as soon as someone pulled a building permit to do something in this area, we would have realized that there were issues, that it just happened to be that one. So,
All right, I just wanted to see if that, make sure that was, something you guys considered.
And and I apologize to the gentleman because I was talking, but when you came up, some of the issues that you just put up are great issues and questions, but if this board sees a site plan, regardless of what the zoning is now or may change, there'll be a site plan for that development that went to the zoning board. You would get a notification as in a butter, and then you could come in. Those are specific questions that staff has brought up, and you would have that opportunity to ask those questions again. So they're good questions. So whatever form that development takes down the road, you'll have a chance to ask those questions as well.
Yeah, we already met, and I know how that board is going to vote.
No, it'll come to this board. It'll come to the planning board. The planning board has what they call a site plan review. It's not the zoning board. So you'll get a new notice to talk about literally the technical part of that plan: parking, landscaping, snow removal, dumpster location, lighting. Those are planning board issues. The design of the building, the architectural. Those are legitimate questions that you can ask when it comes for site plan review here. Okay?
That would include a sidewalk that at some point in Derry's history was sort of let go? Because there was at one point a sidewalk there. Is that part of that discussion as well?
It could be, it could be because when we review it real quickly, I know I'm sidetracking, but it could be because when that plan's going to be reviewed and it comes to this board, it's reviewed with the staff of planning, building, code enforcement, fire, police, public works. We look at those issues, whether it's sidewalk, utilities, lighting. We have a highway safety committee that's made up of police, fire, public works staff. They review that intersection to see site distance issues and see how that works, because that's a tough location right there. And I don't want to single them out all the time, but those are great questions and they will be brought up.
No. Well, I want to thank you for letting me have this time to ask questions.
Thanks.
Take care.
So I just want to chime in on the snow removal thing. We hadn't really talked about that, but we did talk about it on the site walk. And I may be speaking out of turn a little bit, so stand corrected if so, but one of the things about Broadway, the traditional business overlay district as it was, it has wide sidewalks and there are some spaces for planting trees. So in low snow years, the town just basically piles big hedgerows between the sidewalk and the street. But in order to make it a walkable downtown, they often also bring in front loaders and truck the snow somewhere else. And that's what almost all urban compact core cities do when they have that kind of streetscape. And so one of the things we should be thinking about when we're envisioning where the TBOD is applicable is Public Works, who isn't here, willing to take on that onus if we have those kind of zero front setbacks and sidewalks. Are they willing to go in there and truck snow off those streets as well?
We do it as a conditional requirement.
I'm sure I'll get some feedback for having said that, but it's something that should be thought about because that is one of the properties of the original TBOD, and as it expands to other streets, we need to think about that.
Okay. Randy?
So a couple of comments on whichever way we decide to go, whether to back off the TBOD dimensions, as Mr. Nelson had talked about, or leave them. To Mr. Meyer's point, consider the conditional use, but eliminate the sections that were written about hardship. Take that out. That would alleviate that concern. The other point to Mr. Barker is, say he did want to change it, if we did put him back in street, take him out of the TBOD, I should say, because his minimum setback there is 20 feet in the CBD. And if he did want to develop it with commercial on the first floor, we could write something But the problem with that is it affects the whole CBD to allow him to do that. But the problem with that is CBD is rather large, and now you're affecting all of that.
Yes.
So now we're back to unintended consequences no matter what we do. So what we have to do as we figure this, where do we foresee the least amount of unintended consequences? Is it with leaving the boundaries the way they are, going with the conditional use but eliminating the hardship statements, or pulling back the TBOD? These are the things that we really have to consider to mitigate the unintended consequences that we're facing now.
I think my recommendation is to let Liz and, people can walk in her office, make suggestions on where you individually think. She can collect all that data and say, hey, here's the consensus of the board, bring it back.
Yep.
And then we can still have the discussion, what's the right thing to do. But I would like to see a map for us and say, is it just these little lots, or give it some more
Try to
consideration?
build the best of two models.
Yeah.
Tune them, and then kind of finally say, well, which one?
Which one you want.
Right.
Because
Side by side.
Yeah, no matter which model we choose,
Yeah.
whether we redraw the line or we go with the conditional use permit, each one of we've all been here long enough.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Each one of the choices we have is going to come with some unintended consequences.
Yep.
And the only way we can deal with this is to pick what we think is the best at the time, given what we know, and watch it over a period of time and make adjustments. That's why we're here now.
Yep.
We looked at this 15 years ago and said, hey, we're getting we got Main Street, we got room at Airing, we're doing all this streetscape. Man, this town's gonna, we're gonna take off, and it'll be really nice to have all these options for people. And ta-da, 15 years later, okay, it didn't spread as far as we thought. Now it may be causing hardships on the people that are there. Was there a life-changing event that caused us to think about this? Yes.
Yep.
Right? And now it's like, wow, okay, it didn't go as far, right? It didn't go as far as we thought. Okay, now, maybe we pull it back a little. How we do it is kind of irrelevant, but we'll pull it back a little and watch it for a few years and see what happens.
Got to make it some kind of adjustment.
Don't you think it's interesting, ironically, and I'm off to going sideways here, but it took a fire, and I've seen pictures of where like Dave said, the Cumberland Farm site was built in the 70s, and they didn't have zoning, they just put it up, from what I was told. But the pictures of that building was right on the sidewalk, and it took a fire to us to say, look, we need to make a traditional business overlay, and now you had a fire at that house last year.
Well,
so it kind of like forces the issue on us, which is a good thing.
There's usually some event that causes these.
Well,
I think
It's a beautiful building, too.
I know, it was. I've
Unless
seen
anybody
pictures
else
of it.
got anything else, I think Liz is under,
She's chomping at the bit.
so we all need to get to her on what.
Okay.
And Dave Nelson's offered to come in the office and help out, so, and others too.
So with that, we'll close out this workshop here.
Yep.
All right, thank you all for coming out.
Appreciate you coming out
Well,
tonight.
thanks, people. Appreciate it. Hopefully that answered most of your questions.
Have a good night.
Liz, we'll have it right back.
Well, I'm taking over for number 3. Okay, Mr. O'Connor's walking away for a moment, and he's passed the baton to me, so we're going to talk about the next workshop to discuss the wording of Article 19, Independent Adult Community Overlay District in relationship to House Bill 1661, Section 72.
I don't know if she had a question. though.
Everybody has their
I don't know, she was walking up here.
Everybody has their thing in front of them, and we can see we have a section 19 of our adult overlay, independent adult community overlay district. Do we have a map for that somewhere?
We don't, because it's in any district where we allow single-family with water and sewer, or, well, where we allow single-family.
So
there's
right
no-
now, we have a couple of these developments over near our transfer station, correct?
Yeah,
And then another one
Yeah, sorry.
over near the hospital.
Yeah, sorry, stand
Right?
corrected. MDR,
Those are the
LMDR,
districts, those are where they currently exist. And this was done to put us in line with the new House Bill, 1661, Section 72. So the first one, item number 3, it looks like, have less impact on the public schools, and there's a revision there, Liz, you'll have that?
Fill in the
We'll
blank.
fill in the blank, okay? If everybody jumps down to section 2, or number 2 of section 165-146, little addition to the definitions. Anybody have any questions on those definitions? It just highlights everybody on this board is eligible for an independent living community except for Liz.
No, I
Oh,
qualify.
and Richard over there.
Richard does it.
Richard doesn't apply.
older-
All
I'm older
the
than you
rest
think.
of us do.
I think this language came directly out of the attorney's letter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have any issues with the wording there in 2A and B for all of us that now apply. And then obviously getting rid of, on the top of the next page, Liz, all that comes out, right?
Yes.
If everybody moves down now to section 165-150, it looks like we're taking away items number 1 and 2, which are all related to what we just added in the previous definitions page. So I don't think there's any use there. So 1 and 2 go away, so 3 becomes 1. Allowable building types are, we've added in the word single family and detached dwellings and townhouses. I believe detached dwellings was added for our ancillary use stuff that we've all been seeing now at the State House, where everybody can, add a subsequent building to their single-family homes for particular uses now.
I sent a no on that one. I can't, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it's a workshop, dude.
Put no on that.
Huh?
Bill?
Oh, no, he's talking about accessory dwelling.
Accessory dwellings.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, because people are, so actually, should we say detached accessory dwellings instead of just dwellings?
No, I think they're allowed by right anywhere you have a single-family dwelling, so we don't have to.
We don't have to
No.
use the word accessory. Okay.
No, and actually, this was more to, because it had said single detached and townhouses, which made no sense. It was like, what's a single detached? That's
Okay.
why we added, we clarified that with those 2 words.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so down in number 3, again, the same thing. Buildings should be either single family, so that's good.
Yeah.
Detached dwellings, then we get rid of a couple of things now. Okay, so the next section here, with the appropriate X's that Liz would add in, does the town really want to say we intend to prohibit specific uses? Past discussion on the board wants no duplexes. I guess I would still concur with no duplexes, but I will defer to my fellow board members for their comments. Richard? This kind of, we're looking at duplex questions at this point. So we had, a long time ago, prior to you being the board, scratched out duplexes in most of the town at this point.
I moved to Derry for the lack of duplexes, so I would say no duplexes, please.
Okay. David?
I think, if I recall correctly, the issue with duplexes, they were effectively a two-member condo association without a condo board and without a third member to vote to break the tie. So there was lots of owner squabbles between the two. Whereas if you got 3 or 4 or 5, now you've got an owners association and you've got some sort of regulatory and governance that would not keep neighbor fighting neighbor. So that's what I remember.
Okay,
Okay.
that explains it. Good.
Andy?
So, no, okay, as far as the duplexes?
Yeah, it's the comments that Liz and George have. I'm on item number 3. George, we're on the-
I stand by that. We don't,
Got it.
yeah, I agree with Mr. Nelson on that.
Yeah, I got it. And then, hey, I'll get you in 1 second, Andy. We got you, buddy. Mr. Granassi?
I'm fine.
You're all set? Andy, shoot.
Yeah, Jim, as I think you know, I live in a duplex, and so that's in the interest of full disclosure.
That's cool.
I can understand the sentiment, because maybe there were too many of them built at some point in Derry, and maybe some of them don't live up to the standards that we'd all like in our communities, but there are duplexes and there are duplexes. There are some really nice ones in town, you know, Jim, and there are some others, and there's some others. So I'm not on board with saying that no duplexes. I have faced the issue you're talking about with 2 owners, but reasonable people can work. I have dealt with those issues myself personally, and as a local attorney, I've seen people deal with those issues, but reasonable people can work these things out. So I wouldn't like to get rid of duplexes just on the basis that some people aren't able to work out their issues. And the reason is because, you know, sometimes there are some people that can't afford the housing costs, as you know, have gone crazy. So I think they're I think they're an affordable alternative for a lot of people. That's it.
Okay. So I'm just going by, the consensus here looks to be to keep it at a minimum of 3 dwellings. Obviously, Mr. Myers would like to keep it at 2 dwellings, so we'll note that accordingly. But it looks like minimum of 3 is where the board's going, and I'll turn it back to the chairman.
Okay,
That's where we are, John.
Thank you for taking over for me. I just want to bring your attention, I did not watch the State Committee on Municipality, so I may ask that we kind of delay making any decision on this one yet, because HB 44 will require on a single lot, even less than an acre, 4 units in one building, and that passed through the committee. So I'm not sure where it is. I'll follow back up with that.
Okay.
So just want to leave that, and Liz and George, like I say, they were tracking it the other day too when it went through.
No, let's hold off on that
That
one then.
one that staff, Liz and I separately wrote to the legislature, and we didn't support that bill. And many people have, but oppose it. I mean,
We'll keep an eye on it.
So the next section we had, Mr. Chairman, was number 6, no unit shall contain more than 2 bedrooms, and then folks up here can see the comments from staff.
While we're in that section, Mr. Chair,
Oh, sorry,
so it's not highlighted in red, but if we go to 6.4,
yes.
that's in conflict with 165.8. It says where there will be more than 1 building on a lot. 165.8 says there can only be 1 building on a lot unless it's a multi-family development.
Which one's that? So
So if you take 6.4,
6-4, yeah, the new 4, yeah.
where there will be more than 1 building on a lot, our 165.8 states that there can only be 1 building on a lot unless it's a multifamily development.
165,
8.
number 8?
No, in our zoning, it's not on this.
Oh, yeah.
It's in conflict with our zoning 165.8. Just something while we're working on this to
Oh,
be aware of. See what I'm saying, Liz?
Yeah, so should we add in something that says this takes precedence over section 165.8?
That would be for the board to decide. The problem with that is, then somebody comes along that has an oversized house lot and says, well, if it's all right for workforce housing, then I want to put workforce housing in my backyard.
So workforce housing would allow multiple separate buildings, whereas standard zoning, it's 1 building per lot, right? Is that what we're saying? As opposed to if it's workforce housing, they couldn't be like multi-unit in a single building.
We don't have an ordinance, so
Yeah.
we don't have the ordinance to cover that.
we don't know because we don't have an ordinance.
Well, that's confusing.
Yeah.
We're being directed by the state for the workforce
Yeah.
housing elements.
So that's just something that we have to be aware of as we're writing this. Because we started having a spat of that a few years back, Jim, and 165.8 was already in,
Yeah.
but it was one of those little-known obscure ordinances, and it was brought up, and that was the end of that. People had half-acre lots and water and sewer, so they were trying to stick a house in their backyard on that other quarter acre on the same lot without subdividing.
So if you have multiple separate people owning multiple separate homes on a single lot, and there's no like condominium association, how do you tax that?
That's the point with 165.8, you can't. And you don't have adequate frontage for 2 lots. So they were trying to put 2 houses on 1 lot without adequate
Two
frontage.
owners of record, but a single parcel, how do you apportion the taxes?
That's the argument.
The argument
We don't want HB 44.
Yeah, that's the argument, that we don't want that new state law. It's kind of like accessory dwellings. All of a sudden, we're allowing people to stick another house in their back lot so they
Well,
can
but it's
take
still
care of
the
their
same
family.
owner of record, as opposed to separate.
Not necessarily. Under accessory dwellings, not necessarily. That's the problem.
Well, I guess whatever the state does, we have to zig with their zag. We have to figure out how to accommodate
Yeah,
it, so.
And under their accessory dwelling RSAs, again, it's the unintended consequences. There's somebody in some town that wanted to do this, so they felt it was great for the entire state. And, you know, when you're in some small town, somewhere maybe way up north where it doesn't make a difference, and you got 1,000 people living there on, 80,000 acres, who cares if there's another house behind you?
A lot of
Makes a
these-
hell of a lot of difference in Derry.
Just to note, a lot of these bills that we're discussing that are issues, they were rammed in the last minute, actually last 5 minutes, on an omnibus bill. There were 70 some odd bills attached to one bill, and it was thrown in the bucket. They just wanted one thing, but everything else tagged along with it. And that's what happened. Just like the one we're dealing with, and I think ours is number 72. So that's just to let everybody know, it was on an omnibus bill.
Well,
And hopefully they
okay.
stopped that this year.
We still have to figure it out how to
How to
deal with
get
it.
around it, yeah. We were hoping that was
So
going to
we
be
were on
brought up
10.
individually.
Which one were we on now?
But
We were
this one
on,
here takes effect by the governor
6.
signing
Number
it
6.
by end of June.
So the question on number 6 is, how do we feel about bedrooms? More than 2, because right now, we limited it in the original writing of this to 2, because it was basically for, independent adult communities. We felt, that, two spouses didn't really
Yeah,
need
but-
3 bedrooms.
So
But
that's still what we're talking about, right?
yeah, we're there. Now, I want to make sure what constitutes a bedroom, because there are a lot of couples.
That should be square feet.
There's a lot of couples that like to have an office, but a bedroom is considered a bedroom when there's a fixed closet?
Yep.
Correct?
Yes,
So
correct.
you could still technically have 3 rooms, as long as one of them doesn't have a closet. You could certainly convert it to a bedroom by putting an armoire in there and say, hey, look, I got the 3rd bedroom.
You'd be
But-
shocked. Randy knows when you go in people's houses.
Right, no, but I mean, but from a tax perspective, it's still a 2-bedroom house, right? From a tax.
It is, but I will give you an example, and that's what Liz and I talked this, and that's where we brought it up. Like, if you read that last sentence, Lifestyle Homes, which is a very nice development up on Shenandoah Road where Jim lives, those are 2 bedrooms. But there's an area in there for an office, and these were approved prior to COVID. So our point, when you given what's happened with COVID, we're getting more people, good or bad. They're either are working from home completely or hybrid. So we're seeing more people saying, I want to have an office. So technically, it's 2 bedrooms, but if they have a 3rd room now because they're working from home.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
quite
the
frankly.
assessor will put it, because I did the same thing when the kids moved out. I made it an office and everything else. I said, now I have 3 bedrooms, not 4.
Well, but you
He
still have
said,
a
no.
closet. No, you have a closet.
I have
so
a
it's
closet.
bedroom, right? But to George's point, that development off of Shenito, across from the upper room, those houses are gorgeous.
They're beautiful.
And
They
they're
went for
beautiful
$450,000
homes. And they're
to
like
$500,000.
$450,000 to $500,000 homes. They're 2-bedroom houses on 1 level living and downstairs the full basements. I mean, that's like right behind my neighborhood, and we watch those go up. They're absolutely fantastic. So I don't have an issue keeping it at 2 bedrooms. That doesn't restrict you from building 2 offices either. And then saying, okay, here's an armoire, and if somebody's got to move in, they just
I mean,
closet.
and I agree with Jim. I think just staff comments we get from folks, we agree with the 2 bedrooms, because we do hear people say if they're an older couple or retired, we've had several people say, well, my son and daughter want to come visit me for a weekend or a night or whatever, or a relative for vacation. They give them that 2nd bedroom for the most part. Most of them tell us they don't need a 3rd bedroom, but they want a separate office area to have their computer, not in their bedroom or not in their dining room. We hear that often.
So, you guys want to move? You guys want to move? Nobody has a real Andy. We don't want to
Andy,
forget
got anything
Andy.
to say?
I'm good.
He's good.
Thank you.
And I think the next one, number 10, just talks about fire. So that's just filling in the appropriate.
My only comment on that is the last "and current NFPA requirements." That belongs in the building code, not in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
We're sort of stepping on another department's toes here.
So
Issues?
cross that out.
Issues with anybody?
Yeah, I would say, I would cross out "and NFPA requirements.
Nobody has an issue?
No.
Wipe it out. Do you want us to, are you looking for just comments on the other yellow area, Liz? 165, 153? It's yellowed on the bottom of page 3.
Oh,
I think you got to turn to the next page.
No, it's all yellow. Oh, and then, oh, okay, gotcha. The question's there, gotcha.
oh,
So,
yeah.
David and Jim, that came up. Sorry, I apologize. I told us that came up when we did this the last time. The board did not want to have a lot of 55 and old. They wanted to limit it by saying you can only do a percentage of the total dwelling units in the town. That was by the planning boards from the original independent living 15 years ago.
so there's a question here that says, how does this apply to workforce housing? What we're talking about is the adult housing, and I thought by having a workshop on a separate section to define workforce housing, that we could get away from the state's mandate that says, well, wherever it, says adult housing, it has to mean workforce housing, if we have workforce housing that applies in all the same districts. So is that true?
But I thought if they got an additional housing on there, then it becomes part of the workforce housing. Am I saying that
The
right?
state, yeah, the state, exactly. That's what they're mandating. They're going to make it mandatory that you're going to allow that to happen.
Because any extra benefits or points that the
Yeah,
adult
they said wherever
housing-
you allow it and whatever benefits you have to give.
Right.
But if we have this document, which is a whole separate section that defines workforce housing, shouldn't we deal with the workforce housing what-ifs in that and not worry about it in the adult housing?
Right.
I would agree with Mr. Nelson.
yeah, no, that's
I would agree
fine.
with Mr. Nelson on that, yeah. If
Yeah,
we're
well-
gonna have a section on workforce housing, we ought to just
Okay,
keep it, and keep adults separate, yeah.
okay.
And I guess everything else in there is fine. I mean, it looks like we still have some bandwidth, so I wouldn't worry about the 3% at this point.
Okay, all right, so we don't worry about it. All right.
And everything else below that seems straightforward, right?
Mr. Chair?
So does that complete everything? Randy?
Andy had a
I
question.
just have a comment for Liz on 6.4.
Yeah.
6-4.
If you had it written, where there will be more than one multi-unit building on a lot, then it conforms with 165A.
More than one multi-unit?
Yep.
Which one are you reading there? Number?
6.4. Back up to
It
6.4.
always, it says where there will be more than one
Building.
building. What do you want to say?
Multi-unit building, because multi-unit buildings are allowed in 165A.
Oh, okay. One multi-unit building, okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that Liz kind of button this up what we talked to tonight and bring it back to us.
Anything else anybody has?
Second.
Check with Mr. Andy.
Mr. Andy?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Mr. Mallaby, you have anything you would like to say at this time?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
By the way, you could have sat closer, we don't bite.
No.
I was hanging out with the riffraff.
Oh, Owen, huh?
Oh,
You and Owen hanging out on the edge there, all right.
People sit. That's where the cool people sit over there.
Wow.
Don't forget, he can cut and paste the video.
Yeah, yeah, he can make you look real good or real bad on the video, Richard.
I don't need help with one of them, unfortunately.
So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
Good comeback, Richard, man. Getting right in, dude.
Hi, Andy.